Okay. All right. So, good morning once again, everybody, and you're welcome to today's session. So, very quickly, in the last class, we started our conversation around the data structure and what are some of the guides, what are some of the rules for data transformation. And before we decide on what kind of transformation we are to do, there has to be some things that we have observed on our data set. And we were able to look at a set of rules that whenever we have a data set violating any of those rules, we need to do some transformation. In the last class, I mentioned to us that we have 7 of those rules. Can we quickly have a recap of those? What are the rules of data management? What are the rules? Who remembers? Abdul Solawali Sadiq.
Okay. Okay. No empty rows and columns.
Excellent. No empty rows, no empty columns. That's 2 of 7.
Yeah, all dates must be in a single column.
Excellent. All data must be in a single column.
Every unique data must have its own column.
Every unique data must have its own column. That's 4.
No totals or subtotals.
No totals or subtotals. Perfect. That's 5. We have 2 more rules to go. Two more rules. No obstructions around your data set. And 1 more to go.
Single row of heading.
Excellent. Single row of heading. So those are the rules for data management. And there are such rules that will guide whatever transformation we are doing within our data set. So just stemming from what we looked at in the last class, we had a particular data set that we cleaned up. We observed that there were some violations in that data set, and we were able to clean those up in the last class. So stemming from there now, we want to observe some scenarios and what are the Power Query methodology to undo those scenarios. So I'll be sharing a file on the chat very quickly. Your computer. So come here to desktop, this PC, desktop, um, personal, Power BI Bootcamp, Power BI Bootcamp, then data set, data prep, and data cleaning. Okay, so I have a file for you on the chart. Please, as soon as we have that downloaded onto our desktop, let's do mention the same. Okay, Olawale, do you have it? Do you have the file now? Olawale, I say responses from Sadiq and Abdul Qudus. Okay, not sure Lawal is with us. All right, so now we go straight into our, let me launch the file on Excel. So I'll just do something very quickly so that we're sure of what we are going to look at before we get to connect to that, the different data sets. So I'm just launching my Excel and then I'll connect to this file. And for me, I want to have a copy of the file, so I would save another copy on my desktop very quickly. Pull this on my desktop so that I can have a different copy to connect to. All right, so now what we want to look at is there are some different scenarios that we might be faced with. And essentially, we want to use this conversation to drive some of the possibilities for transformation within Power Query. So beyond the fact that we already do know those rules, so the data sets that we looked at in the last class, the data set is not, or did not cater for some other possible transformations that we might want to do in Power Query. And that's the reason why I want us to do some exercises with this file. And so from whatever we are able to gather further in this class, we would have a better understanding as to what are the possibilities and what are the different ways we could use to undo some of the other transformations.
Even right sometime.
Hello,
that we
Chief.
might want to do in
Hello,
Power
good
Query.
morning.
Good morning,
morning.
Abdul.
Yeah. Sorry
Hello,
for
Mr.
coming late.
Hamid. The file I downloaded is not looking like the one I'm seeing on your screen.
Okay. Let me see. What do you have on the file?
Date, customer name, segment, city, unit, peak, quantity, discount, profits.
Okay, maybe you need to change. There are different worksheets there.
Okay.
So if you should have some other worksheets there on
Yeah.
that file.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, Abdul Samad, you were saying something. Okay, maybe that wasn't for me. So now let's start with this. The very first thing is this: we'll try to relate those set of rules, we relate them to whatever situation we are considering. And so we can now say how to address that in Power Query. Looking at this very first sheet here, transpose. If you look at this data set, which of the rules do we think this is violating? Which of the rules is this violating?
Every unique data must have its own column.
Every unique data must have its own column. Excellent. What are the unique data categories that we have here?
We have ship mode, standard class, same day. I think it should include first class also. Sales. Well, that includes sales.
Okay. Any other thing?
Column names. We have multiple same column names.
Okay. So what should be the actual column names? What should be our actual column names here on this data? We know that, okay,
one
go
on the column A should be our actual column, should be our actual column name.
So you mean what we have on column A should be the actual column headers, right?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. So because everything that we have from column B down to column N, they are values within the column. So what we should have normally should be something like this. We should have something like this. This is what we should have. So we have ship mode and sales to be our column headers, and then we have every other thing fall within. So we have standard class, same day, first class. All of these are examples of the kinds of ship modes that we have and what are the different sales for each of these ship modes. So that's all we should have. So which means that we have a single rule that's been violated on this data set. And the rule is that we do not have each data category falling inside of a column. So we have it going across different columns. So we need to find a way to ensure that they all fall within the same column. And essentially what we need to do is just turning this entire table around. So once we have what is on the row to be the columns, we have something like this, and this would solve the situation. So let's connect to this data set in our Power Query. So let me just do something. Let me launch a file very quickly. Okay, please can somebody assist Abdul Samad with the file? Please let's share with him. So, and as I'm doing this, I want every one of us, let's connect to the transpose worksheet. That's the first worksheet we are connecting to. So everybody, let's connect to that. So I'll connect to mine as well now. All right, thanks everyone. So I would close out of this Excel workbook. Then you should see this on Q quick access. So I want to connect to this one. Yep. File not found. Okay, I've renamed it. So let me go the actual route. So once we have connected to the transpose worksheet and we are inside of Power Query, please let's mention that on the chat. This is So anybody is in Power Query, you have connected to the transpose file.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that, Sadiq. Abdul Kudus, Ali Abdul Samad, are we inside of Power Query now?
I'm
I
still
think-
working on it. It's a bit slow.
Abdul Samad's line is breaking off. I didn't catch that well. Abdul Kudus, are you in Power Query?
And not yet, it's loading.
Okay. So please, as soon as we're in, let's give a prompt.
Okay.
Thank you. Olawale, I'm not sure Olawale is here with us. I've not heard him speak.
Hello, Mr. Musin.
Sir.
Okay,
I have a question, Mr. Okay, transpose. The one with transpose. Okay.
Okay, what's your question on that?
Okay, I was actually looking for the table we're connecting to. I just got to my transpose.
Yes. So have you connected to it now?
Yeah, I'm loading it.
Okay, okay. Sadiq, you wanted to ask a question?
Okay, yes. So I said I continue from where we stopped last week. So in my queries on the left tab, I still have the other tables that we worked on.
That's fine. That's fine. It won't affect anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Ahmed. Mine took me to the didn't take me exactly to the transpose page.
Okay. Where did it take it to?
It took me to table tools and reports.
Table tools.
Yeah, and reports page. Should I share my screen?
Please do. Okay, so what you did after you selected transpose was you clicked on load, right?
Yes, yes.
So if you want to go to Power Query, you need to click on transform data.
Okay.
Do you get? So instead of clicking on load, when you do transform data, it takes you directly into Power Query. But now that you are in Power BI, that you have loaded the data, if you want to transform it now, you have a couple of options. If you look at your home tab, you see transform data. Yes, correct. So you can click on that. That would open Power Query for you. Transform data, yes.
Yeah.
It should open Power Query for you as soon as you click on that button. So that's your Power Query window.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I see somebody who has not been in our class before, Abubakar. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're welcome, sir. What did you bring for us, sir? Okay, so I'm guessing everybody is in Power Query now. I'm guessing, so we can proceed. So if you look at our data sets now, look at your applied steps. Power Query has done some things for you. What are the things that Power Query has done for you that you think you do not need? Everybody look at your applied steps. Up until which of the step is necessary?
Source and navigation.
Source and navigation, perfect. The reason why we don't need the promoted headers is because, anybody wants to speak to that? Why don't we need the promoted header step? The promoted header step, why don't we need it?
Well, because we have to switch the header to ship mode and sales.
Excellent. Primarily because that is not our header. So what we have as the header at the moment, Power Query is guessing that's meant to be our header, but it is not our header. So we need to reverse that so that what Power Query has pushed to the header level comes back to row number 1. So how do we reverse our steps? Do we remember? How do we reverse our steps?
Oh, we delete change type and promoted headers.
Perfect. So let's go on. Change type, promoted headers, let's get it off. So as soon as we do that, our data is back to how it was in Excel. That's how it was in Excel. We have 2 rows of data. The row 1 has ship mode, row 2 has sales. But we observe that because this is not the actual way our data is meant to be, it's violating a rule which says that all our data category must have its unique columns, which is not the case now. And we have seen that what we need to do is to turn our table around essentially, and the command to do that is the transpose command. Where will I find the transpose command? Where will I find the transpose command? We saw that in the last class.
At the transform tab.
Transform tab, excellent. But I want to show us very quickly another way. So if we look at our, what's it called? If we look at there's an icon behind all of the column names, just above where we have 1 and 2. That icon there gives us access to some commands that would affect the entire table. That is what we have here. So if you look at this, okay, seems like we don't have transpose here anymore, okay. But this is also a way to get to some commands, some buttons, instead of going to the interface, the GUI, to get to whatever we need. So let's go, transform tab, then we do transpose. As soon as we do that, we get exactly what I did earlier in Excel, but now there is still something wrong. Who can spot that? Who can spot that? What else is still wrong with this data set? We have transposed. We now have unique data category for each column, but something is still wrong.
The column name.
The column name. Where is our column header?
It's on row 1.
Row number 1. Excellent. How do we take that up?
Make row the header.
Use first row as headers. So everybody, let's go on to do that. Is there any other thing that's still wrong with this data set? Or is it fine now? Is our data set fine now?
Well, I think so.
Okay. Anybody else? What do we think? So our data set's fine?
Looks fine.
Yes, it is. So our data set is fine now, and we are good to go. So let's look at a second scenario. So that is the scenario of transpose. Before you transpose, so let me show us something very quickly. So we don't need to do this. So I'll just do something very quickly for me. All right. So this is what we add. We add this. Power Query did this for us, which was pushing what we had on the first row, promoting it to the header level. This was what Power Query did for us. If we do not reverse that step, this is what will happen. If we go on to transpose like this, wherein we have our headers, we have the first row being used as the header, and we have only one row left. If I go on to transpose now, observe what happens. You see that whatever was on the other header level, I would lose it. And that is the implication of we not reversing that step. So the first thing you need to do before you do a transpose is to ensure that you don't have any part of your data on the header level. If you do, you would lose some part of your data. So you need to reverse the step first. So after you must have reversed the step, then we can now go on to do your transpose, and that is only when your transpose would work just fine. So I'll transpose and I'll use first row as headers. So that is the first scenario we looked at. The second scenario, so if you go to the unpivot worksheet, unpivot 1, everybody, let's look at this worksheet and let's tell me, what do we think is wrong with this data on this worksheet, unpivot 1? What do we think is wrong? Which of the rules of data management is violated here? Which of the rules do we have violated here? Anybody is able to spot that? Which of the rules we have violated here?
All data must be in a single column.
All data.
Must be in a single column.
Okay, how does that translate to what we have? Which columns do we have that they don't have unique data category?
This from column B to O, they should, it's like a location column, so they should be under the same, I believe they should be under the same column as name, like something like location.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot for that. And that is the situation. That's very correct. Because if you look at column A, we'll notice that column A says ship mode. And it has everything under column A. There are all the kinds of ship mode that we have. So, but when we look at column B, it says Austin, and we have some values. Waco, we have some values. Chicago, we have some values, which means that all of these things that we have here, they are actually cities with the individual values for the ship modes. So typically what we should have should be something like this. We have our ship mode and first class. We have this, and then we should have a column for city, and we should have a column for, say, maybe value or something like that. And then when ship mode is first class and the city is Austin, we have this, and then what is the value for that? The value is 7. So that is what we should have. And then we go on to when the ship mode is first class and city is Waco. So we have Waco as the city, we have ship mode to be first class, and then we have our value to be 5. So that's how we should have. So which means that we would have our first class repeated a couple of times, and then we'll have all our locations like this, the entire location that we have here. We have it here, and then the values for first class, we have that also represented here. So this is what we should have. This for first class. So then we come to same day, and that will continue. You come to second class, come to standard class. So we are meant to have 3 columns on the data set, which would represent our unique data category. So we have our first unique data category is our ship mode. We have the city to be the next unique data category, and the next one will be the value. So that's how we should have. And that's what we'll deal with very quickly inside of our Power Query. So let's go back to Power Query now. So here we are on Power Query. Remember that we have not connected to that worksheet. But from within Power Query, we can connect to other worksheets or other data sources that we have. If we want to do that, we have a couple of options. So if I come to the Home tab, under my Home tab, you will see New Source. I will see Recent Sources. We have New Source and we have Recent Sources. Recent sources typically means the sources that you have connected to before now. So Power Query tries to take a record of the sources that we have connected to recently. And so it allows you to establish reconnection to them. And you can pull out data from those sources very quickly. So since we have connected to the workbook that has all of these worksheets, so what we need to do is to come to Recent Sources. And under my recent sources, I would say data cleaning exercises. So I'll click on that, which is the source that has the pivot 1 that I want to connect to. And so I have a navigator window. I just need to go and select on pivot 1. And then I'll click on OK. All right, so we are within Power Query now. So everybody, let's connect to on pivot 1. Once you have connected to it, please give a prompt. All right. So the very first thing we do again, Power Query has assumed that our first row is our header. So we need to tell Power Query that that is not it. So let's go on to reverse that. So we have that already reversed. But because in this situation, we have our first column to be fine. So we have excuse me. All right. But because we have our first column to be fine, so our first column has ship mode, and then it has all the elements of the ship mode. But here now, we have Austin, Waco, and our cities across the other columns that we have. The major difference between transpose and unpivot, I think I mentioned this in the last class. The major difference between the two is that transpose works on the entire table. It turns around the entire table. While for unpivot, it only works on a portion of the table. And because of that difference, it brings in another slight difference in the sense that when we spoke about transpose, we needed the column headers to be empty so that our entire data is sitting from row 1 downwards. That's the only way our transpose can work perfectly. The case is slightly different for unpivot. So for unpivot, what we need to do is that because we have a column that is fine, so we don't want that to be mixed up in our data set again. We have a column that is fine, which is our column 1. So that column, we assume that because it's fine, so we know what the header is from that particular column. So we'll push our header up from that. So we use our first row as headers, which Power Query was right in doing that. But now that's the only column that is fine that we want to retain. We want to turn around every other part of our data so that eventually they get unsummarized, and we now have a column that has all our line items, or our cities in this case, and we have another column that speaks to whatever individual values we have for each of those columns. So since we have a column that is fine, which is our ship mode, we can have that selected, and then we do a right click. So we do a right click and we have some options to unpivot. So we can unpivot columns, we can unpivot all the columns, and we can unpivot only selected columns. Obviously, we'll do unpivot other columns because we have the column that is fine, we have it selected. So I'll do unpivot other columns. And when we do that, we get the same experience that we were working on in the Excel file. So let's do that, everybody. Let's unpivot. We should have 3 columns. Once you have that, then you're good. Okay, I think I've just summed the second done. Okay, maybe that was to correct the first one.
Hello, Mr. Hamid. I'm not getting the unpivot menu.
Okay, so now there are a couple of ways. Are you on the transform tab?
Okay, I'm there now.
Okay, so on the transform tab, you will see unpivot columns.
Okay. So
and again,
okay.
So the other option you have is to right click. You can right click on the ship mode column, then you see unpivot other columns.
Okay.
So those are the 2 options you have.
Yeah, done. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so everybody, we have our 3 columns now. Do we?
Yes, yes, I do.
Okay. So now, what again do we think we should do on this data? Is it fine as it is? What's more to be done?
Looks fine for my end.
Just to rename the column name.
Perfect. To rename the columns. That's the only thing left. So whenever we unpivot, the 2 columns that our unpivot action would generate for us, one would be attributes, the other one would be values. So we need to rename so that we just make it intuitive for us. So the attributes, we can rename it to city or location as the case may be. So how to rename, you just double click on the column header. Once you double click on the column header, we can begin to type. It makes it active and you can type. And where you have values, maybe value is fine, maybe you want to call it amount, maybe you want to call it something else. So that's all. And our data type, they are just correct. Are we good up till this point, everybody?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay. Anyone has a question so far?
None for my end.
Okay. All right. So let's look at the next scenario. We have unpivot 2. It is the same thing as what we have seen. The difference is just that for this, for some locations, we don't have data. And we want that to be handled in Power Query. So what this will just mean is that wherever you are meant to have ship mode to be first class and location to be WACO, it will ignore it because WACO has no data for first class. So that's what will happen. So everybody, the same step as what we have done. Let's connect to unpivot 2 and let's deal with that as well. Once you have it dealt with, once you have it clean, please type done on the chart. Unpivot 2, that's what we are connecting to. So a quick classwork. Let's do it, please.
Okay, done.
All right.
But
Thanks for that.
I noticed it filtered the, what's the name? The null columns. So we have 3 first class columns, rows, sorry.
Yeah, so wherever you add empty in your actual data, it will be ignored when you're on pivot. That's what that means. Do you get that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So that's on pivot for you. So whenever we say that, what our transformation would cater for would not be the entire data set, the entire table. So we are only turning around some portion of our table, then your best bet is to do on pivot. But when you see that you want to turn around the entire table, you want to turn around such that your columns becomes your rows completely and your rows becomes your column completely, then what you need to do is to transpose. So the difference between the two is just that for transpose, it's on all the entire table. for on pivot is on a portion of the table. Let's look at.
Okay.
Yes, go on, please. Go on, please.
In the case of transpose, our columns, like the value columns, will show the null parts. I'm just asking.
In the case of transpose, yes, it should. So let's see it. Let me connect to it. Recent source. Then okay, on pivot 2, then I'll do okay. All right, so if I take out these two guys, and then we do a transpose, you see that we still have our nulls.
Yes.
So it's what transpose is just doing is turning around your table. Whatever was on your columns will become the rows. But on pivot, it's like turning around first, then secondly is doing the opposite of what your pivot table would do. The table that we have here, what we can see here is something pivot table will give to us. If we have, let me do something here. So we go back and then do this. Then I will run pivot, other columns. Then let me copy. I copy this entire table. I think I should be able to copy. So let me paste this in Excel. Yeah, perfect. So I have this, then I will just insert pivot table. She used this, okay. And then, so for this now, I can pick my ship mode and drop it on the rows, and I can pick my attribute and drop it on the columns. And then I'll put my values on values. So this is exactly what we saw here. If I go back to on pivot 2, this, what we have here, having some empties in between, is exactly what we would get when we pivot our table. So if you look at, this is first class now. This is WACO, it's empty. So if I come to on pivot 2, this is first class, this is WACO, it's empty. So for first class, it is only Austin, Philadelphia, and San Francisco that has data. Let's look at our pivot. Austin has data, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. So that is, so what on pivot is doing for you is, one, is turning around, and secondly, it is unsummarizing your data. So it's doing the opposite of the pivot. Well, that's what it's doing. And that's from the name on pivot. I hope I'm not confusing us.
No, not at all, not at all.
Okay, so that we just see what that implies and getting back to how it was. So if we transpose this, what it would do is just to turn around the entire thing, which means that we'll retain all the nulls. But if we on pivot, it will summarize this, return it back to this form. So whatever add nulls, it will go off, it will ignore it completely. So let's look at the next scenario. So let me delete this, my worksheet, delete. Then let's look at this one. Look at the empty rows worksheet. What do we think is wrong with this data?
It has total.
It has totals, one. What other thing?
It has an empty row.
It has an empty row. Perfect. So it has totals and it has an empty row. How do we deal with that in Power Query? So let's quickly connect to it. So everybody connect to that worksheet, empty row. Empty rows. Please mention as soon as you are connected to it. Okay, so who else who is not connected to it yet? Abdul Samad, I guess you haven't.
Yeah, I'm connecting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm there now.
Okay, great. All right, so if we look at this, immediately in Power Query, we can see what our empty row has translated to. So our empty row on Excel, row 18, what it translated to on our Power Query is row 17 here, which means something else has happened. What do we think has happened? Row 18 on Excel has become row 17 in Power Query. What's wrong? What do we think is wrong?
So Excel uses the first row as header.
Yes,
So
Excel used the first row as headers. Go on, please.
I mean, Power Query uses the first row as headers.
Okay. Why for Excel, it counted it as part of the data.
Yes.
Excellent. So now, our row 17 that has nulls completely. So that's what was empty on Excel. Row 19, that's where we have our total. Then we have another additional row that is empty. How do we deal with this kind of nulls? There are a couple of options, really, a couple of options, but I will show us some and I would want us to figure out some. If we look at our tabs under the transform tab, if you go to the transform tab, we see that we have a button that says remove rows. Can we see that button, everybody? Can we see the button under the transform tab, remove rows?
Yes.
Excellent. If you click on the drop down for remove rows, we have a couple of options. Which of these do we think is appropriate for this scenario? Which of this option would be appropriate? Remove what?
Blank row.
Okay. Remove blank rows. What other option could work? But again, if we say remove blank, remove what?
I think alternate row.
Alternate row would be like it removes the first row, then the third row, then the fifth row, then the seventh row. That's alternate.
Yeah, I don't.
Yes, please.
I don't have remove rows on my own transform tab here.
Is it transform or home tab? Sorry, home tab. I mentioned transform. That was an error. It's under the home tab, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So one is if we say remove blank rows, do we expect it to remove all the 3 rows that we have down? We are saying remove blank rows. I've not tried it, but what I expect is that it would not remove row 18 because row 18 is not completely blank. That's what I'm thinking. What do we think?
I don't think it's a remove row 18. I don't think so.
I don't think so too. So let me do it. Remove blank rows. It removed the 2 other rows that were completely blank. It left row 17. It's now on row 17. So it was on row 18, which is the total row. So it's not expected to remove that row because that row is not completely blank. So that may not be the best way to address this. So what do we think? Although we can still use that, Then we come to our ship mode and filter out total. That's possible, right? Do we understand what I just explained now?
Yes, yes, I do.
Somebody's confused. Please ask your question.
Yes, I actually didn't get that.
Okay, so what I said is we can actually still go on to remove blank rows. That would take care of the 2 completely blank rows, but leaving out the total row. And the next step will now be that this total is on ship mode. And once we are able to filter out total from the ship mode, obviously it will affect the entire row. Do you get it now?
Yeah.
So if I come here to ship mode and I uncheck this total and I do okay, that row is gone. So which means we have dealt with the 3 rows that we don't need in 2 steps. But that may not be the best way to address this. So let's go back. So I'll come back to my remove rows. And then I have option to remove bottom rows. We have an option to remove bottom rows. This might come in handy because we can see from this data set that the 3 rows that we want to remove, they are the bottom rows. So I'll click on remove bottom rows. And this is asking me, how many rows do I want to remove? So how many are we removing here?
3.
3. So I'll put 3 and then I'll do okay. And with one click, we have dealt with the 3 rows that we don't need. So let's do that first. Then I have a question for us. Please let me know as soon as we have done this. All right, Abdul Samad, are we together?
Yes, yes. Okay.
So now, what we did was to use remove rows. So I want us to look at, let's look at the Home tab again. There is another button there that might assist us to also get rid of what we don't need on this particular scenario. Please look at the Home tab and let's figure that out. Let's see if we'll get it. It's a button on the Home tab. We saw a remove rows button on the Home tab. Let's look at for another button that can assist us in this scenario.
Manage button.
Manage. You said manage button? Manage. No, not manage. So what is the opposite of removing rows? If you are not removing, what are we doing?
Adding.
We are adding or we are keeping, right?
Yeah.
So where we have this button that we have for keep rows, so it can also do the same thing for us in the sense that what part of this data, how many rows do we want to keep? How many rows?
16.
16. So we could just say keep top rows, and then we say 16. And it will do just the same thing for us. So what I want to pick out from this is there are a couple of ways to achieve the same thing in Power Query. It just depends on how much understanding we have about the different transformational processes and how much we want to explore. So it doesn't have to be a one-way thing. This same thing that we have done, I could also try something else that I'm thinking of now to come to this column that has nulls, this column ID. This column ID, customer ID column, it has nulls. And I know that these three nulls, if I'm able to get rid of it, it will get rid of this entire 3 rows. So what's other thing I could do is to come to this customer ID, click on the drop down, and I will filter out null. I just check null and I'll do OK. And that will take care of the three rows there. So a couple of ways to do the same thing. There might be a 4th way, there might be a 5th way. It depends on how we open our minds to some of these things and how much we explore of them. So let's get to, please, have we all done this now? We have this filtered out, everybody?
Yes. So quick question. So I'm guessing if we had the null probably at row 4, row 8, row 11, we'll go with this last step you just showed.
Yes, that might be the option that you have. So just to see, but before you do that, you need to find out where would you apply the filters that would not affect your actual data. So I'll come back. So in this instance now, if I filter out null on ship mode, will it work?
It won't work completely.
Because there is something else that I want to get rid of, which is not null on ship mode. So before you do that, ensure you observe your columns properly to see where is the safest place to do that, and that would not eat up your actual data. So let's see the next scenario very quickly. We have a data set for nulls. And for this one, obviously, we have some empty rows. We have some rows that are not completely empty, something like this. So what we have here is a subtotal, so which is something wrong. We shouldn't have subtotals and we shouldn't have totals. So let's connect to the nulls worksheet, everybody. Let's connect to it quickly. Once you have connected to it, please do mention that. The nulls worksheet, that's what we are connecting to. All right, so let's look at this now, and this would answer the very last question more appropriately. Let's look at this. We have a couple of nulls to deal with. Where do we think would be the most appropriate place to filter out null that would cater for all the nulls and would not affect our actual data?
Excuse me, are you talking of just one move to clear all the nulls?
Yes, just one move. One filter. So I come to ship mode and I uncheck null. Would that be the safest thing? Or I come to customer ID, uncheck null, or which of the columns should I come to, filter out the null, and I will have dealt with all the nulls that I need to remove from this data set.
Ship mode.
Okay, ship mode. Any other option?
Ship mode has the highest number of nodes.
Okay, that's correct. But
all the data will be lost if we go with ship mode.
Exactly. So because if you look at row number 2 on ship mode, it has null, correct? But there is valid data. We have a customer ID that used that particular ship mode and on what segment and what's the sales amount.
Yeah.
So normally, if we look at our Excel again, this ship mode here, it's a merged cell. 3 cells have been merged for this first class. So first class is meant to be from row 2 to row 4. But Power Query does not recognize merged cell. And even in Excel, if you merge cells, your value is actually staying on a cell. It's not staying across the 3 cells. So that's why if I
Hello? I think we lost Mr. Ahmed.
Yep. I thought it was my network. Bro.
Also, I thought it was my network too.
We just wait for him there.
My apologies for that. Can we hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. I'm so sorry for that. So, okay. So I was explaining the merged cell. So the cell, it appears to be merged, but our value same day is sitting on a single cell. So if you look at 6 to 9, it's meant to be same day. So which means on our Power Query, everything we have on the same day down to row 8 is meant to be same day. The same vein, everything from first class down to row 3 is meant to be first class, because if we look at our Excel, 3 cells were merged. So 3 rows were merged for first class. So it means that on our Power Query, we expect that row 1, row 2, and row 3, it's meant to be first class. So the nulls that we have under first class, it's meant to be first class. The nulls under same day, it's meant to be same day. Nulls under standard class is meant to be standard class. So if we filter out null from ship mode, we'll lose row 2, row 3, row 4, row 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 down. So we'll have only 3 rows left, which means that we have lost some part of our data. So that would work. We won't filter out nulls from the ship mode. So where is the safer place to filter out?
I think either of the from column customer ID, customer name, segment still, and sales should do it. I don't know about it in one move, but my idea is I can do this in 2 moves. But if we filter out from customer ID, filter the nodes, I don't know if it will work for the ship mode columns also.
Okay, so this is what we look at, and you're correct with that. If we filter out null from customer ID, the first null we have under customer ID.
I think we do from.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Because and also same as the grand total for whole or.
Sorry, I didn't hear that well.
Okay, I said I think it will probably like we sort it from either customer ID, customer name, or segment. Because taking it from that part, it will only affect the total for each of the shipment of the ship mode, and also the grand total, which are not necessary for it. So
Perfect.
it will filter those out.
Perfect. So, and that's very, very correct, and that's very clear. So we have our customer ID, which whatever transaction has no customer ID is null, which means that transaction did not happen. Nothing happened here. So which is the safe place to remove null. So once we filter out null from customer ID, customer name, or segment, it takes out row 4, which is the first subtotal. Excuse me, we don't need it. It takes out row 9, which is the other subtotal. We don't need it. And it takes out everything from 19 downwards. So let's go on to filter out now from customer ID or segment or customer name. So we are back to this. We have 16 rows, but there is one more thing. How do we resolve that?
We'll fill down column, the ship mode column.
Perfect. So let's fill down. So we are good. That's all of this. So the essence of this is so that we know that it's not everywhere that we find null that we can go onto that column and filter out. We need to observe clearly to see what is the implication of filtering out null from this column. Will it affect our data set? Will it chop off some part of our data set? If that's the case, then that's not a safe place to filter out null. You may want to consider some other columns or some other ways of handling that. So let's see quickly the next scenario. Want to see, let's connect to the split and merge worksheet. Once we are connected to it, let's mention that. Split and merge. Okay, so let's assume that on this particular data set now, we have our customer name, which is the full name, but we want to split this into the first name and the last name. So we want to have first name on a column, last name on another column. There are a couple of ways to do this. The very first way is if we want to split this column, but not retaining the original data. So what we need to do is to come here to under our home tab. You'll see that we have a button here called split column. There is a button here which says split column. If I click on the drop down for split column, there are a couple of options. How do you want to split? That is the next thing, the next logical thing to be asked. How do you want to split your columns? Are you splitting by delimiter? Are you splitting by number of characters, by position, lowercase to upper, uppercase to all of this? What does delimiter mean? Delimiter is what separates them. So how do you want to split? We want to split in this case by delimiter. So we want Daniel to be on a column. We want Lacey to be on another column. When it gets to Mark, Mark should be on a column. Hamilton should be on another column. When they go to Carol, Carol should be on a column. Triggs should be on another column. So if you want to split, you just click on the column, then you say split column just right above under the home tab. You click on the drop down, we say by delimiter. Then it's asking, what is the kind of delimiter? In this case, Power Query was able to figure out that the delimiter is space. That is the separator. You have some other options of delimiters. It could be comma, it could be colon, all of these. So if it's not that, you can remove, you can change it to whatever delimiter. And then how do you want to split? Do you want to split based on the leftmost delimiter, which means if we have Daniel, Lacey, Adebayo, it will only split the first. So it means Daniel will be on a column, Lacey and Adebayo will be on another column. That's the leftmost. Rightmost will do the opposite. Each occurrence will mean that if you have three names, we will have three columns eventually, because for each occurrence of the delimiter, there would be a split that would happen. So because we now have just two names here, so whatever we select here will work perfectly. It will work the same way. So let's go on to click on OK. And now we have two columns, customer name 1, which has the first name, and customer name 2, which has the last name. So let's go on to do it. Once we have that done, please, let's give a prompt. We are splitting the customer name column. Thank you, Abdulsamad. Thank you, Abdul Qudus. Sadiq, Lawali Hassan, we're together. Okay, so the other option we have is assuming that we want to split these two columns, but we want to retain the original column, which means that we'll have our original column, which is the customer name column. Then we have two extra columns that would have the first name and the last name. What we may want to do is to come to the Add Column tab. So we can come to the Add Column tab, and we have a couple of options from here. I would want to use the simple one so that we don't get confused at all. When we get to the Add Column tab, the very first thing I want to establish is this. Whatever we click on under the Add Column tab will result into an extra column for us. So if you click on anything under this Add Column tab, you get extra column. That's the first thing. Then the next thing is this. Because we want to work on this customer name column, have column from examples. Column from example is just a sort of an AI feature that you have in Power Query that allows you to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That allows you to give example of what you want to do, and Power Query completes it for you. So we have our customer name selected. So I'll go on to click on column from examples. And now it's asking that, what is the example? I should give an example of what I want. So here I will just type Daniel. I'll type Daniel. That's all I will type. Then I'll go to another cell. And immediately I go to another cell, you see that Power Query has filled out the remaining for me. So it has filled out. So here it pulled out Mark, here it pulled out Adrian, here it pulled out Carol and Albert. Everything is correct. So I'll just click on OK. And I have this. So this is one way to do it. The other way to do it is that I come here back to my actual column, customer name. Then under the Add Column tab, you'll see a button here called Extract. So we want to extract from this column. So I'll click the drop down for Extract. And we have a couple of options. So everybody look at these options. Which of these can we use to pull out the last name?
Text after delimiter.
Perfect. Text after delimiter. So if I click on text after delimiter, it pulls out the end. It asks me what's the delimiter. So the delimiter here is space. So I'll just put a space and then I'll do OK. And immediately, if I go to the end of my data, I see that it has pulled out the last name for me. So it depends on your scenario. So if you want to retain the original columns, you might want to come here to do an extraction. For the first name, you need to extract text before delimiter. Last name, you need to extract text after delimiter, and whatever the case is. But if you don't need to retain the original column, you can just stay on the Home tab and ask it to split column. And once it splits, you just paste the original column into whatever you have it defined, and then you lose what the original column is. So everybody, please let's complete this very quickly. Extract the first and the last name, and also try to keep the original column as well, so we see how those work out. Once you have those, please let us know. Anybody has completed that, or we are confused? Do you have questions? Okay, Abdul Samad, have you done it? Okay, so the opposite of that, assuming what we have is the first name and the last name, and we want to combine that into full name. So that's the opposite. So what we do is we want to do a merge. So, but before we can do a merge, it has to be that we have two columns selected. So let's look at something very quickly. If I come to the transform tab, under the transform tab, you'll see that we have a merge columns. We have a button for merge columns. But if we have a single column selected, that button will not be active. We need to have two columns selected that we want to merge. So I will need to order my control and select the second column. And that's when I will have the button selected, active rather. And so I can go on to click on merge columns, and it will ask me, how do I want to separate this? I want to use a space. And then what name do you want to call it? You can give it a name, and I'll do OK. And it will turn those columns, the two columns that I had initially, to combine them into one. So that's just the opposite of the split. Is there any question up to this point?
None from me.
Okay. Have you done the merged?
Yes.
Okay. So the merge we saw now, it's a merge that would not retain the original column. So which means if we want to merge and we want to retain the original column, where would we go to?
The merge I did retained my original column.
So it means that you clicked on the merge under the add column tab.
Okay.
So if you have used the merge under the transform tab, it should not retain the original column.
Oh.
So those are just the differences. So it depends on what you want. If you want it to retain the original column, then you need to go to add column. But if you want it, if you don't care about the original column, you can do it from the transform. Any question?
No, none from my end.
Okay, so let's quickly look at the other scenario that we have. So we have an advanced split. So this advanced split, what do we want to do? We have our order ID and we have the transaction amount. So this is a data entry issue. Instead of the individual to have repeated the order ID that we have here, have it repeated like that should be about 5 times, and type each of these figures in front of it. 609, then 5.48, then 391.98, then 755.96, then 31.12, then 6.54. This is what the individual was meant to have done. But sometimes because of laziness and stuff, they have typed it like this. So how do we deal with something like, we can't report on something like this. We need to bring it into this particular format. How do we do that? So everybody, let's connect to Advanced Split worksheet. Once you have connected to it, let's mention that. Only one person is connected. Abdul Kudus. Who else is connected to this? All right. So now, what we want to do on this, what's the very first thing we need to do? What's the first thing we need to do? Let's quickly figure that out before we address the issue of splitting or not splitting.
Change row 1 to header.
Perfect. So let's do that. Use first row as headers. So now, what column do we want to split? The amount column. We want to split each of these values to be on individual rows. The way to go about that is we can do our normal split, but we just do something differently. So we know we want to split by the delimiter. So each value before the delimiter, that's what we want to do. So we have that column selected. Then to get a split as well, you can do a right click and you come to split column by delimiter. So what is our delimiter? Our delimiter is a pipe. This is a pipe. But if you're not sure of what that delimiter is, what we can do is, or you're not sure of where that is on your keyboard, you can click on any cell that has that value, that's delimiter. Once you click on it, you see the actual cell value below. Then you can come here to highlight. You can come here to highlight it and do Control C. So just highlight one of it and do Control C. So once you have that copied, then you can come back to the column name. We do a right click. Then you come to split column by delimiter. And now I'll click on this drop down, which is saying space. Space is not our delimiter, so that won't work. So I'll click on the drop down and I'll say custom. And here in the box, I'll do Control V to paste that delimiter there. And now the split art option, which one are we to do? Leftmost delimiter, rightmost, or which one?
Each occurrence.
Sorry?
Each occurrence of the delimiter.
Excellent. Each occurrence of the delimiter, because we wanted to split whenever I sees a delimiter. But if you go on to do this now, it will add like 5 or 6 columns for us. But we want it to do this at a go so that it splits this and then expands our table, put individual values before them, then comes to the next order ID, creates 2 rows for it, puts the values there, comes to the next order ID, creates 3 rows for it, put the value there. That's what we wanted to do. So what we can do is we can actually go this route too. Maybe let's do 2 things. First is, let it split normally like this. So I'll do OK here. If I do okay here, it splits it, then it gives us the number of columns we have. So now, if we want to now address this, what do we think we should do? We have splitted, so we have 6 columns for our values. How do we ensure that we now have unique categories having their own columns?
We pivot it.
Excellent. So we unpivot. So if I come here to unpivot other columns, so this is what we have, but this attribute column, we actually do not need it. So I can take that out. And so we have this. We have our other IDs and we have the values. This is a way. So let me duplicate this query. I'll do a duplicate. And for this one, I would go back to this. Okay, before it splits. All right, so I'll split again now. I'll come here, right click, split column by delimiter. And then we know our delimiter is not space, it's a custom delimiter. So I'll do a Ctrl V here. Each occurrence of the delimiter, perfect. But before we go on to click on OK, we have some advanced options here. So if I click on the drop down for this, you see that it is splitting into columns. That's why we have it all, each of the values taking individual columns. So we can actually ask it to split into rows. So I'll click on rows. And once I click on rows, then I will do OK. And that will just pour everything inside of the same row. So now it has done the split and has unpivoted for us, putting it into the same column. Did we get this, or I should do it again?
Please come again. I didn't get that.
Okay, so I'll go back. I'll go back. So this is where we are. So we do a right click, split columns by delimiter. So here now we have, what is our delimiter? It's a pipe. So we come to custom and put a pipe. So that is our delimiter. That's what is separating each of the values. And we want to split at each occurrence of the delimiter. So if we go like this, by default, it will split it across columns. How did we know? If I come to the advanced options, it's saying that it will split into columns. And it will give us 6 columns because it has looked at the occurrence of the delimiters and has seen that we have, that will result into 6 columns for us because of the largest number of delimiters that we have. But if you want this to go inside of different rows, not splitted across the column, so that for order ID 1, it will repeat it 6 times and have, for each of the occurrence of order ID 1, it will have individual values against it. And it goes on to order ID 2, it will be repeated twice because we have 2 values. Order ID 3 will be repeated 3 times because we have 3 values. So that's what will happen when we split into rows. So we need to select rows, and then we come here to click on OK. And I will push them into different rows. Did we get it now?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Okay. So everybody, let's do. Have we all done this? Okay, so let's look at what other one we have. Replace values and add columns. Okay, let's see if we'll be able to cover it all. So let's connect to the replace value worksheet. But before we connect to it, let's look at this on Excel on my screen. What do we think is wrong with this worksheet, replace values? What do we think is wrong with this data set?
The value of beginning balance as 4,100, but the 100 has a alphabet, not digital, not a
Excellent.
number. And also on the quantity dispensed.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
Excellent. We have some wrong
We have
entries.
the value of surgical gloves.
Yeah, so we have some wrong entries. This 350 is meant to be 350, but this is 35O. This one is, maybe it's meant to be 10, but it's I0. This one maybe it's meant to be 1, but it's I. So some anomalies with data entry issues. So let's connect to it quickly and see